Hello, my name is Esther van Dijk. In this presentation, I will discuss 3 characteristics of the higher education context and how these characteristics are important for studying teacher expertise development. Co-contributors for this paper are Professor Jan van Tartwijk, Professor Marieke van der Schaaf and Professor Manon Kluijtmans. Before I will get to our 3 characteristics, let's first discuss why these are relevant to discuss at all. In short, we argue that context matters. It determines who is teaching and who and what is being taught. Exploring the characteristics of the higher education context helps us to optimize teacher expertise in 2 ways. Firstly, there is a lot of literature about teacher expertise development in primary and secondary education. Insight into how the higher education context differs from these contexts enables us to translate the insights from this existing research and build on these insights when studying and supporting teacher expertise. Secondly, looking at these characteristics of higher education helps to realize what the aspects from this context are that are unique and thus need specific research. This will help to create context-specific knowledge, which helps to support teacher expertise development. The importance of context is also confirmed in expertise literature. Development of expertise is described as adaptation to typical task constraints of the domain. This means that experts have adapted their cognitive, psychomotor and other abilities in such a way they are able to perform superiorly on their tasks. Tasks are thus important because they determine what knowledge and skills are important and in what way they should be used. The domain or the context in turn determines what tasks are relevant and how these tasks look like. For example, teaching in primary and secondary education classroom management may be a more prominent task than in higher education. In this presentation, I will discuss the following 3 characteristics of higher education and their consequences for studying and supporting teacher expertise development. 1. Teaching is combined with other tasks. 2. Knowledge is specialized and dynamic. And 3. Teaching preparation, certification and professional development are diverse. A first characteristic of the higher education context is that teachers in higher education are academics who combine teaching with multiple other professional tasks. For example, an academic who is a teacher in veterinary education may be a teacher but also a practicing veterinarian and a researcher. This means that development of teacher expertise should be studied and supported in light of development in other professional tasks. 2 types of research may be relevant for this. Firstly, research that investigates the relationship between different tasks. For example, research on different types of scholarship and research that addresses the research-teaching nexus. Secondly, based on this characteristic, research that addresses the consequences of this combination of tasks is relevant. This includes research that focuses on boundary crossing processes of academics that move between their different tasks, on development of professional identity as a teacher and as an academic, and on how the combination of tasks influences academics' motivation for teaching. A second characteristic of higher education that impacts teaching has to do with the knowledge that is being taught by teachers. This knowledge concerns the forefront of the discipline and is therefore highly specialized and dynamic. We argue this has at least 2 implications for studying and supporting expertise development of university teachers. Firstly, it means that teachers constantly need to adapt their education to new insights. Designing education, including the design of assessments, thus becomes an important task for these teachers, especially compared to other education contexts, in which more basic knowledge is taught that is more crystallized. Secondly, evolving disciplinary knowledge implies that insight is needed into how to translate this knowledge into a course or curriculum, and how this knowledge can best be taught by teachers. Powerful knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge are important theoretical concepts that are used to explore these issues. The third characteristic of higher education is not about teacher tasks, but about how teachers develop their expertise in these tasks. In higher education, this is very diverse. Contrary to many other educational contexts, didactic training and certification for teaching is not always available or extensively available, and also not always mandatory. Therefore, insights from other education contexts in which there is more formalized and extensive preparation, certification, and professional development, and the research that has investigated this, can therefore be especially interesting. Specific research in the higher education context is also necessary, of course. This could focus on teacher development on several levels. Because teacher development is less formalized, it is interesting to investigate what makes individual teachers engage with it. For example, by looking at their professional identity and motivation, or by looking at their stages of development, as was done by Fuller in the primary and secondary education context. It is also possible to look more at the social context of learning, for example, by focusing on how teachers learn in communities of practice or in formal and informal learning. Finally, research could explore the role of organizations in the development of teachers. This includes research about programs for faculty development and certification, as well as research that studies the influence of organizational structure and culture on learning. The three characteristics discussed in this contribution are of course not the only characteristics that may influence the development of teacher expertise in higher education. Other characteristics may include the student population, the way teacher cooperation and collaboration is organized, and the development and career possibilities for teaching in higher education. All in all, I hope this presentation has convinced you that an understanding of the higher education context is important for both translating insights from other contexts and for developing context-specific knowledge. In this presentation, we have discussed three characteristics of the higher education context in particular. First, that teaching is combined with other tasks. Second, that knowledge is specialized and dynamic. And third, that teacher preparation, certification, and professional development are diverse. This is an overview of the references listed on our slides. You can also find an overview of the references in the PDF version of this presentation. This includes the second part of the references. And finally, if you want to engage in further discussions, have ideas or suggestions for me, or just want to speak with me about the topic of teacher expertise in higher education in general, please feel free to contact me on any of the ways listed on the left side of this slide. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.